The alien warlord gave his crippled daughter to the strongest human slave. No one expected his choice. The great arena of Karzun was silent, except for the occasional whisper of the crowd. It was a place where alien powers met, and the strongest were displayed for all to see. Today, the usual spectacle of fighting and domination would not occur. Instead, Drexel, the feared warlord of the Karzun Empire, had called for something entirely unexpected. He stood tall on the platform, his dark green armor reflecting the pale light of the twin suns, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd. No one in the galaxy could have guessed what he was about to announce. All around him, creatures of various shapes and sizes waited, their curiosity mixed with anticipation. Some were competitors hoping for a chance to see weakness in their rival. Others were emissaries from distant planets, here to witness the continuation of the warlord's legacy. And at the center of it all, under the bright lights, stood a human, Elias Rurk, the strongest human slave in the Empire. For years, he had been taken from his home planet, forced into servitude and trained to obey. He had fought, survived, and endured without complaint. His strength was unmatched, but what made him remarkable was not just his muscles. It was his calm, steady presence. Even in the face of fear, he did not act out of anger. Across the arena, standing slightly behind Drexel, was Velira, the warlord's only daughter. She was small and fragile-looking, her legs weak from a failed bio-augmentation that had been meant to make her stronger. The nobles of Karzun had always dismissed her as useless, unworthy of attention, and certainly unfit to participate in any of her father's grand plans. She had lived her life in quiet observation, studying languages, cultures, and histories, but always hidden from the world's judgment. Today, she was brought out into the light, not as a prize, but as a statement. Drexel's voice, deep and commanding, echoed across the arena. "Today I make a choice that will shock all of you," he declared. The crowd stirred, whispering nervously. "I give my daughter Velira not to another alien noble, not to a warrior of my own people, but to a human, the strongest human in my possession." A wave of shock passed through the spectators. Many of the nobles laughed quietly, believing the human would refuse, insult the girl, or demand a fortune in return. They assumed he would treat her as a burden, as their laws and customs often dictated. But Elias only stood silently, his expression calm, his eyes steady on Velira. Velira's own heart raced. She had feared humiliation, rejection, and derision. She expected scorn, whispers, and perhaps even laughter directed at her. But when she looked at Elias, she saw nothing but quiet understanding. There was no mockery, no hesitation, only a steady, patient strength that seemed to go beyond the physical. The crowd waited, some leaning forward in anticipation, others with arms crossed in doubt. A few even whispered about what was coming next, certain they would witness a scene of cruelty or arrogance. But Elias took a deep breath and stepped forward. He did not bow in submission. He did not raise his voice in protest. He simply knelt before Velira, his eyes meeting hers. It was a gesture that no one had expected. It was not weakness, nor was it subservience. It was respect. The arena fell silent. Drexel's face showed a flicker of curiosity, a shadow of uncertainty. This human was different. He did not act out of fear, ambition, or desire. He acted out of something deeper, something no alien had understood about humans until now. Elias spoke, his voice calm but clear. "You gave me someone worth protecting," he said. "I will prove you chose wisely." Velira's eyes widened. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not for her limitations, but for her worth. The audience held their breath, waiting for the reaction of the warlord, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, Drexel remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded, a gesture almost imperceptible but significant. From that moment, the air in the arena changed. No longer was it about power in the usual sense. It was about something subtler, strength of character, of loyalty, of mutual respect. The human and the alien girl stood together, their unity already making a statement stronger than any weapon or army. As they left the arena, the other nobles whispered among themselves, unsure of how to react. Many were confused, some were impressed, and others quietly feared the implications. If strength was no longer measured by domination, then the rules of the empire might begin to shift. In the days that followed, Elias did not try to assert control over Velira. He listened to her ideas, helped her navigate the complex political world she had never fully experienced, and worked quietly to make her life easier. He built small devices to aid her mobility, arranged schedules that gave her time to study and strategize, and learned everything he could about her world. In return, Valera began to see the human not just as a protector, but as an equal partner. She discovered that his mind was as sharp as his body, that his strength was not just physical, and that his respect for her intelligence made her feel capable in ways she had never felt before. The court began to notice subtle changes. Where before there had been fear and whispers of weakness, now there were glances of admiration. The human, who was supposed to be a slave, was teaching the daughter of the warlord how to navigate power, influence, and diplomacy. The nobles could not understand it. They whispered behind closed doors, trying to predict the outcomes, but no prediction seemed accurate. Meanwhile, Valera and Elias spent hours talking, planning, and understanding one another. They discussed strategy, trade, and culture. Valera shared her observations of the empire, and Elias suggested practical ways to implement improvements. They worked together quietly, without the need for recognition or praise. It was a partnership built on trust and respect, something the empire had never seen before. Despite their calm exterior, challenges awaited them. The empire was built on fear, tradition, and power. Many believed that weakness must be punished and that humans could never rise above their place. But Elias and Valera's quiet strength began to challenge those beliefs. They demonstrated that intelligence, cooperation, and respect could achieve what violence often could not. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them strengthened. Valera's confidence grew, and Elias' reputation evolved from mere strength to a figure of wisdom and reliability. Together, they began to change the perception of humans within the empire. No longer were humans seen only as servants or warriors. They were capable of leadership, innovation, and strategy. One evening, as they reviewed plans for infrastructure improvements in the border territories, Valera looked at Elias and said, "No one expected this. No one expected that a human could understand what I need before I even ask." Elias smiled faintly. "Humans have always survived by seeing possibilities others ignore. We find strength where others see weakness." Valera nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just the crippled daughter of a warlord. She was a partner in a vision that could reshape the empire. And beside her, the human she had once feared now stood as a source of inspiration and hope. Word of their actions began to spread quietly through the empire. Stories of the human and the warlord's daughter circulated among nobles and citizens alike. They marveled at the unusual partnership and whispered of what might come next. While no one in the empire fully understood the implications, everyone sensed that a change was coming, one that could challenge old ideas of power, hierarchy, and human potential. And in the quiet moments, when the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, Elias and Valera would stand together, looking at the stars above Karzun. They understood that the real journey was only beginning. The arena had been a stage for a public spectacle, but the true test of strength would be in shaping the world together, proving that humanity's power was not in domination, but in resilience, ingenuity, and the ability to see value where others saw only weakness. After months of careful work, the empire began to notice the results of the human and the warlord's daughter working together. Where once there had been disorder and inefficiency, there was now organization and progress. Supplies arrived on time, workers followed schedules, and even the border territories, long neglected, were thriving. Yet the changes were subtle at first, easy for the skeptics to dismiss. Many in the court still whispered behind closed doors, unable to understand how a human, a supposed slave, could have such influence. Elias, however, did not seek recognition. He continued quietly, focusing on the practical tasks that others ignored. Valera, now more confident than ever, worked alongside him, learning not just the practical aspects of governance but the deeper lessons of strategy and leadership. Their partnership was built on trust and respect, not authority or fear, which made it stronger than anything the empire had seen before. One morning, Valera suggested they visit a remote border settlement that had long been considered lost to inefficiency. The roads were broken, supplies scarce, and morale low. Many had written the settlement off as hopeless, but Elias saw an opportunity. Together, they planned a journey that would take them across difficult terrain, testing both their endurance and ingenuity. As they traveled, Elias observed the settlements with careful eyes. He noted the broken irrigation systems, the poorly maintained shelters, and the unorganized storage of resources. Using simple materials and creative thinking, he began to propose improvements. Valera watched and learned, her sharp mind absorbing every detail. They devised new ways to distribute water, store food, and manage workers more efficiently. Slowly, they began to implement their plans, showing the settlers that small, thoughtful changes could make a big difference. The settlers were amazed. They had long accepted that their struggles were permanent, that the empire had abandoned them. But Elias and Valera demonstrated otherwise. They showed that problems could be solved, that effort and thought could replace fear and hopelessness. Word of these improvements spread quickly to neighboring settlements, creating a ripple effect that began to alter the perception of what humans could achieve. Meanwhile, back at the capital, Drexel observed their progress with growing interest. The whispers in the court had reached him, and he realized that Elias was teaching lessons that no alien could easily learn. He summoned the human to his chambers, expecting a challenge or perhaps defiance. Instead, Elias greeted him respectfully, as always, and listened to the warlord's questions patiently. "Why do you continue to help her?" Drexel asked. "You could demand your freedom or take what you want. Why remain loyal to someone considered weak?" Elias smiled faintly. "Strength is not just about power," he said. "It is about seeing value where others do not. She is not weak. She simply needs the right support to show her strength. And in helping her, I prove that humans can rise by working together, not by destroying others." Drexel paused, studying the human. For the first time, he realized that the measure of strength in his empire might need to change. He had always valued domination, fear, and physical power. Yet here was a human whose influence spread not through violence, but through respect, intelligence, and careful action. Back in the settlements, Valera began to take on responsibilities she had never imagined possible. She learned to communicate with settlers directly, to understand their problems, and to devise practical solutions. Elias taught her not only the techniques but the philosophy behind them. That leadership required listening, patience, and the ability to adapt. Together, they became a team whose presence transformed the lives of countless people. One evening, as the sun set over a newly repaired settlement, Valera looked at Elias and said, "I never thought I could make a difference, but with you, it feels possible." Elias nodded. "Humans survive by seeing what others overlook. You have ideas, intelligence, and determination. I only help you bring them into action." As they worked, the settlers began to notice changes in themselves. They felt more capable, more confident, and more willing to take initiative. The improvements were not just physical but psychological. People started to believe that they could influence their own lives, rather than being at the mercy of the empire's rigid hierarchy. Back at the court, the whispers grew louder. Other nobles were confused, frustrated, and even fearful. They could not understand how a human, a former slave, could inspire such changes. The usual methods of control, intimidation, threats, and strict rules, seemed ineffective against the quiet progress that Elias and Valera were achieving. Drexel, however, watched closely. He realized that the human was teaching something the Empire had never valued before: collaboration. He began to wonder if this method of strength, mutual respect, and shared purpose might be more powerful than domination. He did not yet fully understand it, but he could see the results with his own eyes. As the months passed, Elias and Valera expanded their influence further. They introduced new methods for education, encouraging settlers to learn not only practical skills, but critical thinking and problem-solving. They organized councils where people could voice concerns and suggest improvements. Slowly, a new culture began to emerge, one where people were valued for their ideas and contributions rather than their status or physical strength. Valera's confidence grew with every success. She began to see herself not as a crippled daughter of a warlord, but as a capable leader who could shape the future. Elias continued to guide her, always patient, always thoughtful, ensuring that she had space to develop her own abilities. Their bond deepened, rooted in mutual respect, shared purpose, and quiet admiration. One day, Drexel called them to the capital for a formal audience. The court had gathered, curious to see the human who had transformed the border territories. Elias and Valera entered, their presence commanding attention without arrogance. Drexel rose and addressed the assembly. "You have all seen what humans can achieve when given the right opportunity," he said. "They can inspire, organize, and lead in ways that challenge our expectations. The human before you has shown that strength is not only measured by domination, but by understanding, collaboration, and innovation." The nobles were stunned. Some were skeptical, but many could not deny the evidence before them. The border territories were thriving, and the settlers spoke highly of the human and the warlord's daughter who had transformed their lives. For the first time, the empire witnessed an alternative form of strength, one that did not rely on fear or force, but on intelligence, cooperation, and respect. Elias and Valera stood side by side, their eyes meeting briefly. Without words, they acknowledged the journey they had taken together. It had not been easy. They had faced doubt, prejudice, and the weight of expectation. Yet through patience, ingenuity, and determination, they had achieved what few had thought possible. In the following weeks, their work continued. They introduced new farming techniques, repaired roads, organized trade networks, and encouraged education. Slowly, more settlements adopted their methods, creating a network of communities that thrived under guidance rather than oppression. The ripple effect of their influence spread across the empire, challenging the old notions of power and leadership. Valera discovered abilities within herself that she had never known. She could analyze problems, communicate effectively with diverse groups, and inspire confidence in others. Elias remained her steady guide, not overshadowing her growth but supporting it. Together, they became a symbol of what could be achieved when strength was measured not by physical dominance, but by intellect, cooperation, and respect for others. One evening, as they reviewed plans for a new settlement, Valera said softly, "I used to think my weakness made me nothing, but now I see that it was never the weakness itself, but the way we approached it that mattered." Elias nodded, smiling. "Humans survive by finding solutions where others see only problems. You are strong because you adapt, learn, and lead. I only help you see what is possible." The empire had begun to change. Fear and dominance no longer ruled every decision. People started to value ideas, initiative, and collaboration. And at the heart of this transformation were a human and a girl who had once been dismissed as powerless. Drexel, observing from his throne, realized that the true measure of strength had shifted. The human had demonstrated a quality that no alien weapon or army could replicate. It was the ability to inspire, to organize, and to lead through respect rather than fear. The warlord nodded slowly, acknowledging that the empire had learned an unexpected lesson. Sometimes, the strongest force is the one that empowers others. And in the quiet moments, as the twin suns set over Karzun, Elias and Valera would stand together, looking at the horizon. They understood that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges, resistance, and doubt. But they also knew that by working together, they had proven something extraordinary. That strength was not only in the body, but in the mind, the heart, and the courage to lift others. The empire watched, learning slowly, and the legend of the human and the warlord's daughter began to grow. It was not a tale of conquest or violence, but of partnership, ingenuity, and quiet power. And in the end, it became clear to everyone who witnessed it. The human spirit, when paired with respect and purpose, could achieve greatness beyond imagination. The empire was changing. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Word of Elias and Valera's success in the border settlements had reached the distant corners of Karzun. Leaders who had long relied on fear to maintain order were beginning to take note. While some dismissed it as a temporary fluke, others grew uneasy. How could a human, a former slave, reshape society without force? How could a girl, once thought incapable, lead with influence rather than power? Elias and Valera continued their work, now with a larger vision. The settlements were thriving, but the empire's core still struggled with inefficiency and mistrust. They decided to extend their methods to central territories, aiming to create a system where respect, collaboration, and innovation could flourish. They began with planning, mapping out trade routes, resource distribution, and educational centers. Each decision was carefully considered, with both of them contributing ideas. Valera brought knowledge of alien politics and customs, while Elias offered human ingenuity, practical problem-solving, and the ability to see solutions others missed. Their partnership had grown deeper, more intuitive. Elias no longer needed to explain every step. Valera understood his reasoning instinctively. Likewise, she could anticipate his suggestions and improve upon them. Their teamwork became seamless, as though they were two halves of the same mind, yet they remained humble. Neither sought personal recognition, knowing that the work itself, the improvement of lives, was the true reward. When they first arrived in a central territory, the reaction of the local leaders was mixed. Some were curious, hoping to learn from the outsiders' success. Others were suspicious, reluctant to accept guidance from a human and a girl whose authority challenged centuries of tradition. Elias and Valera met these reactions with patience. They listened carefully, asking questions and offering practical solutions without arrogance. Slowly, their calm confidence won over skeptical leaders. In one town, the water supply had been inconsistent for decades. The residents were frustrated, and the local governor had nearly given up. Elias observed the system carefully, noting weak points, inefficient storage, and gaps in distribution. Valera suggested adjustments based on her knowledge of alien engineering and local climate. Together, they redesigned the system using simple tools and methods that could be maintained easily. Within days, water flowed more reliably than it had in generations. The townspeople were amazed, and the governor, once cynical, expressed deep gratitude. As the months passed, these small victories multiplied. Trade routes became more reliable, settlements communicated more effectively, and education systems flourished. More importantly, people began to believe in their own ability to contribute. Leaders who had once ruled through fear now found that cooperation, respect, and shared knowledge achieved results far beyond what intimidation could provide. Elias and Valera's partnership also inspired others to rethink their understanding of strength. In alien culture, power had always been physical, hierarchical, and uncompromising. Yet here was a human demonstrating that strength could be measured in patience, ingenuity, and the capacity to inspire others. Here was a girl, once dismissed as weak, showing that intelligence, insight, and determination could shape society more effectively than brute force. Back at the capital, the court began to notice these changes. Some nobles were frustrated, feeling their influence diminished as the human and the girl earned respect and admiration from all corners of the empire. Others were intrigued, recognizing that if they learned from Elias and Valera, they could improve their own territories. Drexel watched closely, aware that his experiment with the human had exceeded even his own expectations. He summoned Elias to his chambers once again. "Your influence grows," Drexel said, studying the human. "You have done more than I imagined, yet the Empire is still cautious." "Many resist your methods. How do you plan to change their minds?" Elias smiled faintly. "I do not aim to force anyone. Change comes slowly. People must see the results for themselves. Once they understand that collaboration works, they will follow. Fear can maintain order, but respect and shared purpose create lasting progress." Drexel considered this. He had long ruled through fear and strength, yet he could see that Elias' approach produced outcomes his armies could never achieve. He realized that the human had revealed a truth the Empire had ignored for centuries. That true strength was not in domination, but in empowering others. Meanwhile, Valera continued to grow as a leader. She traveled to distant settlements, listening to residents, identifying problems, and proposing improvements. She learned to inspire confidence, to encourage initiative, and to guide communities without commanding them. She had become more than Drexel's daughter. She was a figure of hope, a symbol that anyone, regardless of physical limitations, could achieve greatness through thought, effort, and courage. One day, as Elias and Valera visited a particularly isolated settlement, they encountered a unique challenge. The town had been suffering from poor crop yields due to unfamiliar soil conditions. The local farmers had tried every known method, but nothing worked. Elias observed the fields carefully and began experimenting with new planting patterns, natural fertilizers, and water distribution techniques. Valera consulted historical records and applied her knowledge of planetary conditions to suggest adjustments. Together, they worked with the farmers, teaching them techniques while improving the land themselves. Within weeks, the crops began to flourish in ways the settlers had never imagined. The farmers were thrilled, and the story of success spread quickly to neighboring towns. Once again, Elias and Valera demonstrated that knowledge, ingenuity, and collaboration could achieve results no brute force could match. As their reputation grew, other humans and aliens began to join their efforts. Volunteers came from distant planets, inspired by tales of the human and the warlord's daughter transforming communities. Some came seeking guidance, others came to learn, and some simply wished to be part of something meaningful. Ilias welcomed them all, teaching practical skills and encouraging innovative thinking. Valera organized teams, ensuring that each volunteer had a purpose and a sense of ownership. Together, they created a network of communities connected by knowledge, cooperation, and shared success. The Empire's response was mixed. Some leaders embraced the change, seeing the advantages of improved efficiency and happier citizens. Others resisted, clinging to old traditions and questioning the humans' motives. Yet Ilias and Valera never wavered. They continued their work, letting results speak louder than words. The progress was undeniable, and gradually the doubters began to see the value of their approach. One evening, as they returned from a particularly successful mission, Valera looked at Ilias and said, "I used to fear failure, to think that my limitations defined me. But now I see that strength comes from effort, learning, and the courage to try." Ilias nodded. "Humans have always survived by adapting, by finding solutions where others see only problems. You have that ability, Valera. I only help you see it clearly." Their bond had deepened beyond mere partnership. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Together, they were no longer just a human and a girl. They were a symbol of possibility, showing the Empire that cooperation, ingenuity, and perseverance could overcome challenges that brute strength alone could not. The final test came when a severe drought struck several central territories. Rivers ran low, crops failed, and tension rose. Leaders panicked, fearing unrest. Ilias and Valera immediately set to work, analyzing water sources, reorganizing supply chains, and implementing irrigation solutions. Valera coordinated communication between settlements, while Ilias designed practical devices to conserve and distribute water efficiently. Within weeks, the drought's impact was greatly reduced. The settlements survived with minimal loss, and the citizens were inspired by the human and the girl who had guided them through the crisis. Their approach had not only solved an immediate problem, but had strengthened communities, confidence in their ability to endure future challenges. By the end of the year, the Empire had changed in ways that could not be ignored. Leaders began to recognize that true strength was not about fear, power, or domination. It was about vision, understanding, and the ability to empower others. Ilias and Valera had shown that humans could inspire, teach, and lead in ways no alien force could replicate. In the quiet moments, when the work of the day was done, Ilias and Valera would stand together, looking at the stars above Karzun. They understood that their journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, resistance, and doubt. Yet they also knew that by working together, they had proven something extraordinary. That strength was not measured in weapons or armies, but in knowledge, cooperation, and the courage to lift others. The Empire watched and learned. The legend of the human and the warlord's daughter grew, not as a tale of conquest, but as a story of possibility, partnership, and quiet power. And as their influence spread, it became clear to everyone that the human spirit, guided by respect and purpose, could change the world in ways that no force could resist. The Empire had begun to change, but change always drew attention. Rumors of Ilias and Valera's successes had traveled even to the most remote corners of Karzun, reaching leaders who had never witnessed such unity and progress. Some were inspired, hoping to replicate the results in their own territories. Others were suspicious, fearing that humans, once considered inferior, might upset the established order. Yet despite these whispers, Ilias and Valera continued their work without hesitation. The two of them traveled to a region that had long been neglected, where towns were scattered across rocky plains and supplies were scarce. The people there had grown accustomed to hardship and believed that life could not improve. Ilias and Valera arrived quietly, observing without imposing themselves. They spent days walking through villages, listening to the residents, and understanding the challenges they faced. Valera recorded the details carefully, noting which areas required immediate attention and which could benefit from long-term planning. Ilias began with the water supply. He noticed a series of natural reservoirs that had been blocked by debris over time. With Valera's guidance, He designed a simple system to redirect water using gravity and small channels that the locals could maintain themselves. They worked with the villagers, showing them how to clear and maintain the channels and explaining why each step mattered. The people were amazed at how easily the system could improve their lives, and slowly, hope began to replace their long-held resignation. As the weeks passed, Elias and Valera introduced new techniques for farming. They taught the villagers how to rotate crops, use natural fertilizers, and preserve seeds for the next season. Valera shared her knowledge of weather patterns and soil conditions, showing how small adjustments could yield larger results. The villagers began to experiment and for the first time saw consistent success. Their confidence grew, and with it, a sense of pride that had been missing for generations. The changes in the villages did not go unnoticed. Other leaders in the region observed the improvements and sent representatives to learn from the human and the warlord's daughter. These emissaries were initially skeptical, expecting to find secrets or tricks. Instead, they found patience, guidance, and practical solutions. Elias and Valera never demanded recognition or loyalty. They simply taught and demonstrated, allowing the results to speak for themselves. Meanwhile, back at the capital, Drexel watched these developments with growing interest. He had expected the human to be strong in body, but not in mind. Yet now he realized that Elias possessed qualities that surpassed many alien leaders: intelligence, foresight, and the ability to unite people through respect rather than fear. Drexel began to question his own methods, wondering if he had underestimated the potential of humans. In one council meeting, Drexel brought Elias and Valera before the court. The chamber was filled with nobles, emissaries, and scholars, all curious about the duo who had transformed so many regions. Some faces held skepticism, others curiosity, but all eyes were fixed on them. "Explain to us," Drexel commanded, "how a human once enslaved has achieved what our armies could not. How does a girl considered incapable inspire communities to thrive?" Elias spoke first, calmly and clearly. "Strength is not only measured by power or domination. It is measured by the ability to understand, to listen, and to act in ways that empower others. People respond when they are respected, when their ideas matter, and when they see that their efforts produce results. Fear may enforce obedience, but respect and cooperation create lasting progress." Valera added, her voice confident yet gentle, "I have learned that my limitations do not define me. My strength lies in knowledge, in strategy, and in guiding others. With Elias' help, I can put those abilities into action. Together, we show that anyone, regardless of their beginnings, can lead and make a difference." The court was silent for a moment. Many could not comprehend this idea, for it was so different from the traditional ways of the empire. Some whispered doubts, while others leaned forward, eager to hear more. Drexel nodded slowly, signaling that he understood the truth of their words. Encouraged by the council's attention, Elias and Valera continued to expand their efforts. They created training programs for young leaders, teaching them problem-solving, collaboration, and innovative thinking. They encouraged local residents to participate actively in decision-making, showing that leadership was not limited to those with noble birth or physical strength. Communities began to thrive, not because of fear or strict rules, but because people were empowered to contribute and take responsibility. In one particularly challenging region, Elias and Valera faced a unique problem. A network of towns relied on a single bridge to transport goods, but the bridge had been damaged during a storm. Repairing it required coordination, resources, and careful planning. Elias devised a system using local materials and manpower, while Valera organized teams to carry out each step efficiently. Together, they guided the residents in rebuilding the bridge, ensuring that everyone understood the process. When the bridge was complete, trade flowed smoothly, and the towns celebrated their achievement. The sense of accomplishment was stronger than any reward they could have received from the empire. As their reputation grew, more humans and aliens sought to work with them. Volunteers came from distant planets, eager to learn their methods and participate in the growing network of thriving communities. Elias welcomed them all, teaching practical skills and problem-solving techniques. Valera ensured that each person had a meaningful role, fostering cooperation and shared responsibility. The network expanded rapidly, demonstrating that collaboration and ingenuity could overcome obstacles that brute force alone could not. Despite their successes, challenges remained. Some leaders resisted, clinging to old traditions and fearing the empowerment of ordinary people. Elias and Valera met these challenges with patience and persistence. They showed, rather than told, demonstrating that positive results earned trust and respect more effectively than arguments or threats. Slowly, even the skeptics began to see the value in their approach, and resistance diminished. One evening, as they rested after a long day of travel and planning, Valera looked at Elias and said, "I used to fear that my life would be meaningless. Now I see that strength comes from effort, understanding, and the courage to act. Together, we can make a real difference." Elias smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Humans have always survived by finding solutions where others see only problems. You have that ability, Valera. I only help you realize it fully." Their partnership had become more than practical. It was a symbol of possibility, inspiring hope across the empire. People began to understand that leadership was not about dominance or fear, but about listening, adapting, and guiding others toward shared goals. Elias and Valera demonstrated that anyone, regardless of origin or limitations, could contribute meaningfully to society. When a severe storm threatened several towns, Elias and Valera coordinated relief efforts. They organized teams to secure shelters, distribute supplies, and ensure communication between communities. Through careful planning and cooperation, they minimized damage and ensured that no one went without assistance. The residents were amazed at how quickly and efficiently the crisis was handled, and their trust in the human and the girl grew stronger. By the end of the year, the network of thriving communities had expanded across the empire. Leaders who had once doubted now sought advice, and ordinary residents felt empowered to take initiative. The lessons of respect, cooperation, and practical ingenuity had spread far beyond the regions Elias and Valera could personally visit. Drexel observed these changes with quiet pride. He had initiated an experiment by placing his daughter in the care of a human slave, and the results had exceeded even his expectations. The empire had begun to understand that true strength was not measured by weapons or armies, but by intelligence, patience, and the ability to empower others. In the quiet moments, as the twin suns of Curzon set over the horizon, Elias and Valera would stand together, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken. They understood that their work was far from complete, but they also knew that they had shown the empire a new path. Strength could come from cooperation, wisdom, and the courage to lift others. The legend of the human and the warlord's daughter continued to grow, not as a story of conquest, but as a tale of possibility, hope, and quiet power. People across the empire began to believe that change was possible, that limitations could be overcome, and that ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary things when they worked together. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Elias and Valera looked forward, knowing that the future held endless opportunities. Together they had changed the world, proving that true strength was not in fear, domination, or violence, but in understanding, cooperation, and the courage to empower others.